Well, hi, welcome back, or welcome for the first time to A Different View. This is where we are taking a slightly different look at scripture, at faith, at spirituality, a different view, if you will, than we take on Sunday mornings in our worship services. So we're glad that you're here, whether you are a longtime Christian or really on the fringes of faith and investigating and exploring what that might mean, then this is for you. So I hope that you will join us. We are doing this on Tuesdays now, so if you have found us, you know that, but this will be coming out on Tuesday at some point in the day, so you can look for it then or anytime later in the week on the church YouTube channel or on Facebook. So it's there for you whenever you need it. This is the home stretch of our parable series. We have this week and one more week that we are talking about the stories that Jesus told that teach us something about God or about how to live with one another. And to do that, we are back with Pastor Ricky and Pastor Lori, who are here to take apart this week's parable. So Ricky, I'll ask you if you would give us our context, right? Our setting for today's story, and dissect the characters a little bit for us, the players in this story.
Okay, so that means about three things real quickly. Early in Matthew chapter 22, the Jewish religious authorities confront Jesus about his authority. And so he answers them with three consecutive parables, back to back to back. I mean, he is really trying to drive home the point. First one's called the parable of the two sons. If you missed that, you can go to our church webpage. Those are archived. The second response is the parable of the landowner. It's there too. Today's message is about the parable of the wedding banquet. Now, wedding banquets, which today we call a wedding reception, were a little bit different in the days of Jesus. The wedding would be announced, and invitations would go out to people. But it was different than a save the date card, because even though the invitations had gone out and been accepted, there was no date given as to when the wedding banquet would be held. You just simply had to wait and then drop what you were doing and make it a priority to go to the wedding banquet. So this is the type of wedding banquet or wedding reception that Jesus is talking about. People have received the initial invitation. They know the banquet's coming. So they are waiting for that time. And I bet later we'll be talking about the response. Now, in every parable, you have some major players and they need to be identified, a lot of symbolism. In this one, there is the king. It's a picture of God. There is the son, who's a picture of Jesus. There's two different groups that were invited. The first one is a picture of the Jewish people. The second one is a picture of all people, Jew and Gentile, being invited. And then there is the servants. The servants are symbolic of the prophets, the preachers, the messengers, the different people that God used to send his message to the world.
Okay, so that's the why and the who. And so now Lori is going to tell us the story.
Sure. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who've been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention, and they went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners, invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, "Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen." Wow. There's a lot going on in that story.
Yes. So I wanted to take a second sort of sidebar here, because for a lot of folks, myself included, who are very fact-based and analytical, we can get caught up in things like this story where we're saying, well, that's an extreme reaction. Why would people be killed over a wedding and so forth? And we're assuming that, this is just a story that Jesus is telling to make a point. This is not historical fact. So there's hyperbole involved. There's all this exaggeration. And so we don't want to get caught up in the details and the specificity or the historical accuracy or the people wouldn't really behave that way, analytics of it, and analysis of it, and miss the bigger picture and the bigger point. But a lot of folks enjoy playing gotcha with the Bible in that way. Like, well, that couldn't happen, or this couldn't happen, and then they miss the overarching narrative of God's love for God's people. So I wanted to take a quick second to kind of set that aside and listen for the bigger picture. So now let's go back to that bigger picture. You said in the sermon this morning that that this is a parable about judgment, but not in the way we think it is, and that there are sort of two questions that we need to answer. You said a lot of very good other things as well, but I want to focus there and talk about those two questions, if you can.
Sure. The first question pertained to what was the difference between the first group invited, that, as I said earlier, represents or symbolic of the Jewish people, and the second group that was invited. The first group had received the initial invitation, but when they received the summons that now everything's ready, come on, let's party, so to speak, they didn't show up. The second group showed up en masse. They were greatly excited. The passage says that the wedding hall was filled. So what is the difference between the two? The first group received condemnation from the king for their action. The second group received approval. Now, both groups were invited. Neither group had earned or deserved the invitation. So what's the difference? The difference is the second group showed up. Showing up means that we will always put the king's invitation as the top priority in our life. Remember, the king is symbolic of God. It means that every day, the most important priority in our life is a relationship with God. Later in the story, it talks about the fact that the first group just ignored the summons, and they went off. One was a farmer, he went to the field. One was a businessman. So they weren't doing bad things, but they didn't do the best thing. We can get distracted like that, where the good things in life, working, paying bills, taking care of kids, those are all important. We must do those things, but we can't let that drown out our opportunity to develop a relationship with God. That's why we need a daily devotional. That's why we need to worship with other Christians. That's why we need to be students of the Bible. Now, there's a second question in there that is the most intriguing of all, and it has to do with this man who shows up without wedding clothes. Now, that doesn't mean he showed up naked. That doesn't mean he showed up in shoddy clothes. Here's what that is about. Back in the days of Jesus, if you showed up to the wedding banquet, it was customary, not always done, but it was customary for the host to give you a wedding garment. It was kind of like a robe. It was very sheer, but you put it on kind of like a very thin bathrobe. It meant it was a gift from the host. It meant that you had a beloved relationship, and it was like a thank you, if you will. Now, that robe is a picture of the robe of righteousness that the Bible talks about. Righteousness means a right standing or a right relationship with God. And the Bible teaches us that to have that right relationship, we must put our faith, our trust in Jesus Christ. And then the Bible says we are robed in righteousness. We put on Christ, if you will. So here's this man. He's accepted the invitation. He's shown up. But he doesn't have a wedding garment. Everybody else has one. That means he must have been offered one too. Why'd he turn it down? It's a picture, it's symbolic of thinking our self-righteousness is sufficient. It's a picture of someone who says, yeah, I want to come to the party, but I want to make my own choices in life. I don't want God or anybody else telling me what I should do. I know best. I'm going to make my own choices. So it's willful defiance. So there's a picture there of the difference between salvation and discipleship. You see, when we put on Christ, we are empowered to change, to live a different life. That's what discipleship is all about. Changing, converting, growing more into the likeness of Christ. Here's a picture of a man who would not do that. And it brought judgment upon him.
Okay, so that's kind of the main points from this morning, but I wanted Lori to give you an opportunity to share with us, and maybe there's nothing, but anything else from this parable or from Ricky's thoughts this morning that jumped out at you, grabbed you, and made you go, huh?
Well, there was one thing, and I think it's probably just where my mind's been lately and what I've been thinking about, but this idea that we're all invited.
And so if we are all invited to the banquet, then we are all equally valued and loved by God. And while that
Seems like, oh yeah, everyone knows that.
think about the impact on our lives if we lived our
Lives.
as if we fully believed that not only ourselves, but everyone else was loved by God, that we're God's beloved. Like, how would that change how I treat myself? How I allow others to treat me? How would that change how I interact with other people? And we all like to think we live at that level, but the reality is we don't. And I just think in this day when there's so much conversation about racism and equality and people being treated well and with dignity, that this is something that's really important to reflect on. We are all of value and worth, and how does that change how we interact with each other?
I love that. So, lots to think about. I invite you to go back and reread that parable, having heard this conversation, and maybe hear that through a new lens, through a different view, if you will. And just take that time this week to reflect on all that we've talked about, and share some of those thoughts with us. Shoot us a comment and let us know what this made you think about, how you want to respond, or what questions you might have. Okay, so we hope to see you again, and Lori's going to send us on our way this week with a blessing.
God of love, may we feel the powerful warmth of your love for us. May we know that God, you are with us, that you're healing and restoring our lives and bringing us peace. May we love and care for you and love and care for others as you do for us. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.